people, and welcome to the August 2023 episode of Reportercast, which today will cover a niche within a niche, namely fraud and financial crime carried out on major e-commerce platforms. We will discuss this phenomenon on Amazon, but the same patterns and issues apply more broadly to a multitude of smaller companies selling things online and enabling others to sell. We have a range of problems here, from physical fraud, which is to say fake products, counterfeit products being sold. Then we have scams, people pretending to represent Amazon in emails and phone calls to obtain private data. We also have stolen and cloned credit cards being used to buy genuine products on Amazon. And there are also scams that copy the entire Amazon web page and lead people to think it's the genuine page and then collect credit card details that way. Then there's affiliate marketing scams, people pretending to promote different products and advertise for the website, and it's actually all fraudulent. They're getting paid per click and the clicks are fake, and so forth. And the woman who is going to take us through all of this cornucopia of crime is none other than Amazon's head of scam prevention, Abigail Bishop. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The first question, as usual, is about yourself. How did you end up in this job? Why do you find it exciting? And what motivates you to continue? And I saw on your LinkedIn that you were in publishing before, so it seems quite a big change, but maybe not. So why don't you tell us?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like I have one of the best jobs out there. I work both really, really closely with our internal experts on different ways that we can protect consumers from scams. And I get to work with so many other similarly committed organizations externally to share best practice, to learn what's percolating outside of my purview day to day at Amazon, and get to kind of be the bridge between these worlds around such an important issue. You're right. My background is not in scam prevention, but I have spent a lot of time. Most of my career has been really, really focused on a couple of things, which are working in cross-sector, really challenging issues where there's multiple stakeholders who need to lean in, link arms, and make a difference, and doing that at scale. And so how do we, the scale of this challenge is really daunting. We know that we only know so much about what is actually happening to victims of scams due to underreporting of these types of occurrences. And so we have just an incredible need to scale up, link arms, make a difference in people's lives. And that's what I love about my job, and it's what makes this work so important, and what brings me sort of to the office every day.
So yes, right. So I was saying there's definitely a lot of really bad people out there who think nothing of stealing from others, deceiving them, and just doing all of this to enrich themselves regardless of the consequences. So my first question would be, how much of this scamming and thieving on Amazon happens by the hand of organized crime gangs who are professional and sort of have division of labor and different roles within the organization, and how much is it freelancers? I've been reading that increasingly teenagers, computer hackers are getting into this, people with a slight rebellious streak who aren't really criminals, and they can be brought back to decent society. So what's the landscape there?
Yeah, before I go into kind of the look and feel of some of these bad actors, one of the things that I want to underscore out the gate is for impersonation scams in particular, which is really where I spend a lot of my time. And impersonation, not so much impersonation of individuals per se, but impersonation of the Amazon brand is happening off of our store, which makes this type of scam very, very difficult to wrap our arms around and understand and keep tabs of all the different variations of how criminals manipulate consumers' trust that they have in Amazon for their own gain. So this is happening off of our store, which makes sort of the challenge different than some other.
Sorry to interrupt. So let's be clear. What is
Yep.
off the store?
So when a consumer gets a communication off of our store, off of
So it's outside. It's
Amazon.com.
outside the website.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yep. Exactly. And so that's what makes when there is any sort of suspicious activity happening on our store, we have a lot of controls and processes and triggers to address any sort of signals that there might be something off base. We don't have that when it's completely outside of our channels and off of our online marketplace.
Right. Which is they have apps. You have apps as well. So it's not just the website.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But even in operations, we have controls and we have processes to trigger when there are signals that something nefarious might be happening. When we talk about impersonation scams, what makes them so difficult is that they are not within our purview and control, but they are happening and they are impacting consumers at a very meaningful rate. And so for our work, this is we believe at Amazon that we have a responsibility to protect consumers from any bad actor who would use our brand to manipulate consumers into losing their information or money. And so that is really where we are focusing a lot of our time. Yes, you're absolutely right. There are so many different types of scams. There are a lot of different variations. There's lots of different communication methods, monetization techniques. There's different sort of what I think of as baits of employment scams or investment scams, or all of these types of MOs. The thing that we really double down on is the use of our name in any of those activities. And so we go after bad actors of all sizes to address that particular set of crimes.
Okay, so that means when someone runs a phishing campaign with a fake email saying, "Hello, I'm from Amazon. Please put your password here or put your credit card here," you get involved in that and you try to stop it.
Yeah, we do it in a number of ways. So we work to shut down phishing websites. We shut down, last year over 20,000. We also shut down fraudulent phone numbers all over the world, because scammers will cold call you and say, "I'm from Amazon tech support," or "I'm from Amazon account security," or all of these real people are on the other line, and so we've shut down over 10,000 phone numbers last year, and so we get as ahead of it as possible. So before we even see any reports from victims, we have sort of our ears open and our eyes open to what might be happening out in the
Okay, so
world
that's
or
and
shutting
that's
that down.
sorry, that's because I suppose you don't like people tarnishing the brand, right? You don't want, consumers out there, potential clients or even existing clients, to think, uh, this is something that criminals are using against me. So you just want to provide a deterrent. Or what's the motivation? Do you want to deter criminals from doing this with your brand?
So I think it's twofold. I think there is a piece of sort of that brand protection and not letting people exploit our brand and the trust that we've built for decades with many of our customers, but also just consumers at large. The primary motivation, though, is truly grounded in our customer obsession, that this is impacting our customers. This is at scale, has the potential to really undermine consumer confidence in online marketplaces, and we need to protect
Oh, that's
this
interesting.
space to serve consumers overall.
That is
Um,
interesting. That's very insightful. So because Amazon is so big, if you have at macro sort of global level people starting to think twice about shopping online, it's going to hurt Amazon.
it's going to hurt Amazon. It's going to hurt other folks as well, and really, it's going to hurt consumers. Like,
Yeah.
consumers need access to
Oh, I
goods.
can see
They
that.
need, right? Like, this is something that is way outside of Amazon's interest, and because of our success and our scale, we feel a real sense of responsibility to lead,
Yeah.
and to demonstrate that doing this type of work is important, and figure out how we can build bridges between all the different sectors that are touched by these types of crimes.
Right. Well, another sector that's touched by this is the manufacturing sector, especially luxury goods or branded goods. People want these brands, and a lot of the time counterfeit products do make their way back to Amazon as much as other e-commerce websites. And I think Amazon is pretty big, but the counterfeiting industry is a lot bigger. And they have enough resources and enough shell companies and organization to always be a little bit ahead of the law. So can you tell me a little bit about how you try? I know it's not your particular role, but in general, at least, how Amazon tries to stop counterfeiting.
Yeah, we have a number of different teams. You're right. It's not my area of focus. So I can only speak to it at a high level. But we have a number of teams internally. We have in the round across all customer trust issues, whether it's anti-counterfeiting or scam prevention. We have over 15,000 people behind the scenes who are working to protect our consumers and customers from fraud and abuse. And we have teams that prosecute bad actors and investigate criminal activity. We have individuals who put tech controls and machine learning scientists who develop all sorts of signals and ways of identifying where there are suspicious behaviors occurring. All of this kind of transcends all of our customer trust work across
That's
Amazon.
interesting. That's interesting. And I think this is where you have something in common with the banking sector, because the banking sector also has protections at a high level with screening and general behavior analysis and suspicious activity and stuff, but they also very often prosecute people. They work with law enforcement, and we I get press releases all the time from banking associations saying, we put this fraudster in prison, we put this gang in prison, and so forth. And I think this is quite similar. So how closely do you work with law enforcement? And do you think I don't want you to ruin your relationship with the police, but do you think the police can do more? Is there enough law enforcement and resource in law enforcement today in the UK at least, or Europe?
Yeah, we work really closely with partners across the world in law enforcement. We are constantly in communication with different law enforcement agencies at different levels and jurisdictions. It is central to our work, and so we spend a lot of time before even presenting cases, building those cases to hand over to law enforcement. We will investigate leads, we will gather evidence, we will interview victims, we will sort of conduct an investigation ourselves, and then present that over to law enforcement. And we do that all over the world, but we also do other types of actions as well outside of just the law enforcement pieces. We'll do sort of business disruption activities, things like cease and desist orders. Here in the US, we will pull together all sorts of different levers of legal action to for these types of scams.
Right.
But yeah, we work really closely with law enforcement. And I think that, to your other question on the enforcement space has a real challenge in front of it, I think, for a number of different reasons. I think one is underreporting is a massive challenge to understand the nature, the scale, the impact, the evolution of some of these criminal networks. We just do not have a great pulse on what is happening globally for a lot of reasons. But it is a real challenge, and without that information, it's why we at Amazon we are really, really vocal about our need and desire for anyone who has been a victim to report it to us. We have a number of different places where you can report this type of activity to us, and so we can do our part to pick up on these signals, build these cases, send them over to law enforcement as it makes sense. But it's a real challenge. I think the other challenge, which is sort of it's different, but it's related, is the ability for information sharing between jurisdictions. So these criminal networks are not often isolated to Europe. They're not isolated to any one place. They're in many cases global networks that sort of operate between the lines of these jurisdictional boundaries and make it really challenging for law enforcement to track and keep up with. It's just there are real challenges with this space.
Totally. So you find that the police forces of different countries are not really good at talking to each other, right?
Some are in constant contact. We have really good relationships with a number of countries. We've observed some cases where there's a ton of really successful collaboration. But there are things that fall between the cracks, and I don't think anybody would argue with that.
Right. And in terms of the model of policing, fraud and money laundering and scams and counterfeiting, this is just a sliver of the work that the police forces have to do. So in London,
absolutely.
Yeah, in London, they found a model for the City of London to be the City of London Police to be partly funded by industry players. And this is mostly companies that have a presence in the City of London, but they're also expanding into financial crime now. And I think, from what I've been reading, they've been doing a good job, but I haven't heard this happening elsewhere. Do you have this model in other countries, and do you think it's a good idea?
I can't speak to other models, I can say that public-private partnerships in whatever form they take have incredible value, and it takes all sectors pulling together to make a meaningful impact. And so any opportunity to collaborate, I think, is of value.
Okay. And a lot of police go into private practice after a while, and I wonder, do you work steadily with private investigators? There are a lot of them here in London, but also in America, I'm sure. And what sort of work do you I suppose you have to do the work to the standard that the prosecutor would accept, right? So
Yeah, yes. So we do work with outside counsel on certain investigations. We have a lot of investigators in-house that we work with. Our customer protection and enforcement team is an entire team inside Amazon, which is charged with investigating and working with law enforcement around these types of crimes. And so that's really what our team looks like internally. Is a lot of them are, kind of to your point, are former law enforcement officers or members of the military who have shifted over to Amazon and bring that wealth of experience from that sector to their work.
And another component is prosecutions, and in the UK they do private prosecutions as well. So for fraud and counterfeiting and sort of corporate crime in its different guises, it's not uncommon for the prosecution to be brought by the lawyers of the victim. So this is a legal thing that you see in the UK. But I wonder, do you think this is good? Is Amazon doing this in the UK, and should it be expanded to other countries as well?
I'm not sure if we are. I will say that we take a lot of different legal actions. Criminal referrals are one where we refer these cases to law enforcement, but we take a lot of different actions all over the world based off of the legal system of what's going to make most sense. And we've had sort of private filings as well.
Okay. So you prefer to go through the official institutions rather than bring a private prosecution, even where it's possible?
No, I wouldn't say we prefer it. It's just we have a toolbox of different legal levers, and we evaluate the merits of which tool to use depending on the circumstances and the jurisdiction, and what we think is going to deliver results for our customers.
Right. Okay. And let's move on then to I would like to ask you about different typologies of scams that you
Sure.
encounter, and different ways that people can detect them. People can become aware that someone is trying to scam them.
Yeah. Where do you want to start? This is a pretty broad space. So yeah, I think with this, I as I mentioned earlier, impersonation scams, the Better Business Bureau in North America has flagged that of all of the types of scams that exist, over half of them are impersonation scams, and they take a lot of different forms. They show up in a lot of different ways. The commonality between all of them is that the criminal is pretending to be a trusted entity. It could be a family member, it could be a government agency, it could be a trusted company. And they replicate these communications through so many different channels. We've seen everything from QR codes to phone calls to emails to text messages. I mean, the communication channels are super variable, but the key is that they often do it at scale. and they need only really a small percentage of the number of communications they're sending to land with would-be victims. And they use a lot of different monetization techniques. I heard one recently that was using Western Union here in the U.S., which is sort of a different type of monetization technique that I don't see often. Of course, there's credit cards. We see gift card fraud, and in Bitcoin, peer-to-peer payment apps. Like, it really runs the gamut.
Wow.
And go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just saying that sounds amazing. So people actually fall for these things, like, can I sell you something on Amazon, but why don't you pay me in Bitcoin, or how does it work?
So a couple of the one of the most successful types of impersonation scams that we saw, especially last year, was order confirmation scams. So what would happen is you'd receive a text message or an email saying, you have, here's your order confirmation for the cell phone you purchased for £1,000. Call us at this number if you have any questions. And somebody gets something like that, and they're like, what in the world? Like, what is happening here? I didn't order a phone. Okay, let me call this number.
Oh.
They call the number. The person on the other line, it's a real person, and the consumer has this temporary sense of relief of like, oh, thank goodness, I'm talking to like a real person. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And the person says, this is Amazon tech support. How can I help you? Or Amazon customer service. How can I help you? And the thing is that it is not Amazon. You're speaking to a scammer. And they will say, tell me what's going on. The consumer will explain the communication they received. And they'll say, oh yeah, that I let me get to the bottom of this. What I'll need is access to your device. If you could please, download this app, I will sort this on our end. And they will unfortunately download the software and give access to the scammer to their device. And at that point, you're really in trouble, right? And they will kind of move from there until someone catches on that this is not legit, or the money just isn't there. But that is like a really, really common example of just in your day-to-day life, we're not always wired to be, just super suspicious of every single interaction.
Or vigilant, or just vigilant.
Or vigilant, right? And so you hear someone, a real person, and as someone who is not a scammer, you couldn't imagine exploiting somebody the way that they're doing it, right? And you're just, you hear them say, I'm from Amazon, and you're like, what? This is okay, like, they're gonna fix this for me. And you give them access to your bank account, they get into your, your personal information. I mean, it's just, there's terrible, terrible things that happen, but that is one example of how that happens. And it's why we have a number of different communications that we put out into the world, reinforcing some of these sort of bright lines of what Amazon will and will not do. Things like, we will never ask you to pay for a job. We will never ask you to download software. We will never ask you to pay to speak with customer service. We will never ask you. So it's things like that we are yelling from the rooftops out in the world saying, we will not do these things, please be aware of these best practices. But
and it's a structural thing after all, because people do tend to trust each other, and e-commerce is conducted over the phone and over the internet. So you wouldn't have trouble confusing Walmart for something else because it's there and it's big. But when it's a website, it's easy to copy. So I can see your problem. Um, how about affiliate marketing? I've been doing some investigations over the years in this, and this is a can of worms as well. This is big companies having affiliate marketing programs, and basically the companies are getting defrauded massively of millions of dollars, I think, or even more than that, by people who have click farms and stuff like that, and have a very elaborate ways of concealing their IP address and stuff like that. And I just wonder, how does Amazon feel about affiliate marketing? It's not really regulated either, so
yeah,
how do you deal with the fraud in that space?
it's not it's not something that I work on directly, but it is something that would kind of, from my perspective, be one of the types of communication methods that scammers use, and we'd apply the same sort of rigor and enforcement work against that. But it's not really something that I spend a lot of time in specifically.
Right. Okay. Okay. And just because we're coming on to the hour almost, can you give some details about an investigation where it was quite remarkable, something you remember, some top case that you worked on, a bit of true crime where somebody actually went to prison for the damage they did?
Yeah. So I do have one. There was a very savvy consumer, someone with an Ivy League education, that nearly fell victim to a scam. And she reported it to us, and it took a while. It took over a year to complete the investigation and identify sort of the root cause, or the core individuals leading the scam. But we worked with law enforcement in a couple of jurisdictions. It's one of these ones where it's a really good example of cross-jurisdictional cooperation. And we were able to, with this one report, identify the scammers, get down to who were the leaders of the criminal network behind the scam, and arrest them. And they're facing right now their sentencing. So
they're going to be sentenced. So they were found guilty already.
Yep.
Who are they?
It's I don't want to get into too much
of public record. Come on.
No, it depends on which country you're operating in. But it is really happening, and they're awaiting sentencing. And once that works its way properly through the appropriate legal channels, we will be very excited to tell more about that story. But it is a real story, and super compelling, of this one very savvy would-be victim who thankfully didn't lose any money, but was really close to making an incredible difference. And it's pretty powerful. For me, that's one anecdote.
Some details.
Really
how much money was about to get stolen?
I don't remember the exact figure, but it was in the tens of thousands.
Okay, so a serious amount then, probably someone's life savings. And you already mentioned the Ivy League, so we know it was in America.
We don't know. the Ivy League people travel, people live all over the world.
Okay. So
But
just because they went to university in America doesn't make them American. Okay. So what are you
I
giving me?
studied
What
abroad
are
at
the
Oxford.
jurisdiction? Give me the jurisdictions.
No, I'm not going to do that right now.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm hoping you're going to follow up in due course then.
Fair enough. I look forward to it.
Okay, and so moving swiftly on then. Uh, Digital education is a problem as well. People haven't, especially elderly people, haven't
Mm.
really got their heads around the dangers of the online world and how easy it is for someone to impersonate someone else and pretend to be someone else and so forth. And I just wonder, the government isn't really doing much at all. Not in the UK and not in Europe anyway. I don't know about America, but probably not. So is there a role for the private sector to teach people a bit better, use advertising, use whatever, use classes, flyers, whatever it is, to teach people to be a bit more vigilant on the internet?
Yeah, I have a couple of things I wanna highlight with what you just said because I think it's a really good point. Um, we absolutely prioritize consumer education. We, as I said, with uh, some of our bright lines, the things we will and will not do, being a steady beat in people's lives. We partnered with consumer organizations and scam prevention organizations all over the world to contribute to multiple efforts in Japan and Europe in the US and other places to continuously get the word out. I think one of the things that I would challenge with what you said, because I felt I assumed this as well, is um, that some of that digital native or digital savviness is commiserate with mitigating your susceptibility to these scams because recent reports from the National Cyber Alliance here in the States and others have called out this really troublesome trend that Gen Z, sort of younger adults, are increasingly more susceptible to impersonation scams than other generations. And so these
Really?
are people who were born, raised, the internet was widespread, right?
They spend
Um,
more time on the internet than in real life.
well, there's a lot of reasons potentially, right? And so one of the things that I am really keen to get ahead of is with this trend percolating, how can we sort of set aside our preconceived notions that the target victims are, your grandmother with her retirement account, and actually it's the 21-year-old who just does too many things on their phone and is not always thinking before they act, and they're just moving quickly through their digital lives and find themselves in a tangle of a scammer. And so 2 weeks ago we announced a partnership with the Global Cyber Alliance to pick at this issue and develop communication and outreach uh, uh, techniques to the generation that is sort of entering their adult consumerism lives.
Right.
Um, and so anybody who wants to work with us on that, it is open to partnership. It does not have to be Amazon and the Global Cyber Alliance. We want others to lean into this as well. And I think there's a real opportunity to protect a population that might not be as tuned in to their vulnerability to these types of scams.
Right, because they think of themselves as young, savvy, street smart, but clearly probably not if your research showed it, right? But what's the message? I mean, ultimately, let's say some of my audience are 17, which I suppose some of them would be 17, 18. What's your message to them?
I would say one is be very leery of false urgency. anytime that somebody is trying to pressure you into doing anything, pause and evaluate if there's something off about what is happening. Trust your instincts on those types of moments. And the other thing, when it comes to Amazon specifically, when we communicate with you, you can check your message center on your account. There's a log of all of your communications with us. All of your transaction history and account history is going to be on your account. If there's any outreach to you that is about a transaction or an interaction that doesn't quite track with your personal experience, you can check online to see if there is a record of that there. So those are sort of two of my top tips that I would put out, and that's not just Generation Z, but it's sort of applicable to all consumers. But I would say that to my young adult friends as well.
Yeah, because they tend to act on impulse maybe more than the others, I suppose. And final question: your plans and Amazon's plans for the future on fraud and financial crime, and are you lobbying for more law enforcement against fraud, for more police officers, more prosecutors to be dedicated to economic crime?
Yeah. So there's a number of things that we are leaning into across this issue space, and welcome collaboration from folks who have similar commitment on these things. Things like, let's improve support for victims. Let's identify ways where we can responsibly share information between jurisdictions, between organizations. Let's ease and destigmatize the ability to report these crimes so that we can track them and pinpoint the trends more accurately. Let's figure out how we can standardize some of these best practices of communicating with consumers so that we just take that guesswork out of our interactions with our customers of this doesn't feel right, is it right? Getting some standardization across organizations, I think, is something we'd be interested in exploring as well. So those are just a handful of things that we are thinking a lot about and prioritizing, and hoping that others will be interested in working with us on those issues. There's a lot of different organizations who are impacted by these types of crimes, and we want to work with all sorts of sectors to address it.
Okay, sorry. Another question. I know I've said it was the final one, but just the point of clarification. You said there was a stigma on reporting. So do you find people are ashamed of reporting, or what's happening?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that is something that we've heard, is that there's a real emotional toll that happens in the wake of these crimes, where people are embarrassed. They sort of feel like, oh my gosh, how could this happen to me?
How could I be so silly?
How could this happen to me? Like, how did they, nobody likes to be tricked into something, right? And so there's a stigma which does fuel some of that underreporting. And so destigmatizing it, really getting the word out that, listen, these crimes could happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime.
It's okay to make a mistake, just report it.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally, do you have a number? I promise, just a number on how much is not reported versus how much is reported?
I don't have a number. I think it's something, there's other people who have done really great reports on this that I don't have off the top of my head, but I think it's something like we only see about 5% of the actual crimes are reported. So it is severely underreported.
Good God. It's chaos out there, isn't it?
It is a turbulent space, for sure.
Okay, and on that note, thanks very much for participating, and for anyone listening, and have a great weekend ahead. This is being filmed on a Friday, that's why.
Thank you.
All the best.